please pronounce your name correctly for me?
Certainly. It's Michael Kirchoff.
Now, you do lots of different things. Could you give me a little rundown on all the variety of different ways you have your hand in the photographic arts world?
Let's see. That's a long list that keeps getting longer now, apparently. First and foremost, I am a photographer. I used to kind of list all of the things that I do on like social media, and then I basically just changed it to photographer and advocate of the photographic arts because that seemed to encompass everything. But I am a photographer first and foremost. I shoot commercially, though less now than I used to, which is perfectly fine with me. And then I have a fine art photography side, which I love and nurture as much as possible. I try to be a big part of the community as much as possible, locally, regionally, nationally, and worldwide. After that, I am the editor-in-chief of Analog Forever magazine, which is a magazine strictly for the analog photographic arts, but it's not a purist publication by any means. Then I also started a website. It's basically a blog. It's an interview website called Catalyst Interviews, and do something similar to what you're doing, only they're all in written form. There's no video or audio or anything like that. And I interview photographers about their creative process. What is it they do and why they do it, which clearly you're interested in as well.
Well, that's debatable. I mean, the creative process, all of us, we can wax on poetically about this and that for as many hours as anybody asks us to. But like in the end, to a certain extent, I feel like we all just want to know, like, how are you making things successful? You know, kind of like, how are you making sales or finding clients or, you know, getting paid for whatever you need to do, you know, whatever you need to do kind of thing. Like the creative process, I find like, you know, I feel like I don't need to hear other people's creative processes, though of course they influence me, of course, but I don't think that that's sort of the most important thing many times.
Well, I mean, I maybe that's where we differ, because I think you use the term success. You know, everybody has a different meaning behind that. You know, how do we define success?
It is a very subjective word, correct?
Right. And I know that, you know, one of the things that people gravitate to is the financial success of it, whether or not you can sustain yourself in the thing that you are most passionate about. And that's, of course, the hardest thing for anybody to do, I think. But I think in discussing the creative process, it kind of forms a narrative of how that person got to be their form of success or their form of being successful.
Well, and also success changes. Like I have joked that like my original form of success was having a retrospective at the Guggenheim when I was 50 years old. That would have been a successful career to me.
Sure.
Now, I'm 48 years old, so that's not happening. But
there's still time.
You know, as I've gotten older, like, yeah, maybe I was just wrong on the 60-year thing. Maybe it'd be when I'm 80. But the idea of success, like for me, changes over time. Like these days, and maybe I've lowered my standards, as a previous guest has said, which might be true. But I really just want time, money, and space to do my work. So I want to have enough time, enough money, and enough space. Now, I'm not saying I want to, you know, live in a mansion and never work, but I just want to be able to have time, space, and money to devote to my work without having to worry about it.
That makes sense. It's a good list of things to cover. Yeah, I would agree that if you have all of those things, then I would consider you to be wildly successful.
Me too. Yeah, I don't actually have any of those things yet, but I want all of those things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, certainly. I think that I consider myself successful in the fact that when I look back over my career thus far, I realize that everything that I have, from a home to a vehicle to insurance and cameras, everything that I kind of desired and really needed, have all come to me through photography, through the work of photography from a financial standpoint and also from a personal standpoint, how does photography feed your soul? Especially lately, that has become more true than ever before. Because I get to have my hands in so many different aspects of photography. I'm never bored. Time management is actually a huge problem. And I think that that's probably a good problem for anybody to have, especially in the creative arts, no matter what you're doing.
Wait, you're never bored?
No, you should have seen me frantically trying to get a few things done before we even started this conversation. And as soon as we're done, I got a list sitting here next to me of things I need to try to get done today. And they're all photographic related.
Oh, don't kid yourself. I have tons of lists of many, many things I should do, but boy, I am a very good procrastinator.
Oh, yeah. I used to be worse. I'm getting better. And the thing that makes me better is taking on all of the different aspects of what I do. Like I was kind of listing the things that I did. If I didn't do those things, then I would probably procrastinate more. And, if I had more time to work solely on my own photography, I would probably find myself, with my nose in my phone playing some random video game or something, to kind of distract myself from the things that I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that sounds about right for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, you didn't. Okay, yeah, you didn't get to your last thing with 112 Publishing. You didn't get to that one.
The last thing was Blue Mitchell over at 112 Publishing. They do Diffusion Magazine, and he runs a very solid website that's a great resource for finding beautiful and interesting and creative photography to look at. And he had needed help kind of filling that space. So I volunteered myself when I knew that I had very little time. I still volunteered myself because A, he's a great person and I wanted to help, and B, I was interested. I gave myself another aspect to what I do that was similar to what I was doing for the other entities of Analog Forever and Catalyst Interviews. He allowed me to start my own column called Traverse. And it's basically what I've been doing with the other, website and publication, in that I'm featuring photographers that I find who do great work. The only difference with this one, with Traverse, is that none of the photographers can be from the United States. I'm only looking for people who in different countries and trying to find the kind of common thread that we all share, even though our societies and our cultures may be different, in some cases wildly different, and in some cases not so much. But it kind of just broadened my reach as far as communicating with other creatives. And it was something that I'm interested in because I love to travel as well. One of the things I would do when I would travel is I would often go to A, museums and galleries, but B, also try to reach out and meet with other photographers in other countries and do like, what we're doing now and have a conversation about what it is that we do and enjoy that.
Yeah, I noticed that you were in Prague a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I've been there 5 times now, I think, over the years. Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. It's still, in some ways, it's the same. In many more ways, it's different now. But I've always found it to be one of my favorite cities on the planet. I don't know how you feel about it, but I would consider you very fortunate to be able to live there.
It has its pros and cons, just like any city, really.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So something I often wonder about people, though, is like, how did you get started within the creative industries and the creative field in general? So like, were your parents creative? Like, how did you even find the creative field?
I wouldn't say that my parents were creative, but they, to a certain degree, nurtured my interest in the creative arts that I kind of sort of discovered on my own and sort of discovered through the help of my father. Not that I don't think that he really had intended for that to happen. He had 2 big interests in life, and one was history, and the other one was taking family photos. So I got I guess you would consider it a brownie camera. It took like the 126 format cartridge film that you would pop into the back. So film loading was very easy, especially for a kid. And this is when I was maybe 7 years old. So I would kind of join in on the family photos when traveling or, hanging out in the backyard or, throwing a baseball around or whatever. I remember always enjoying getting the photographs back and looking through them the very first time. And it was a very magical experience, and it's an experience that a lot of people have had over the years. And I don't know that necessarily drew me in to seek it out as a profession at all, but it definitely piqued my interest.
Now, did you, after childhood and all that, did you go on for education? Because I was looking through your CV and I didn't see where you went. No, wait, I know where you went to school. You went to the Brooks Institute.
I did. I did not stay on. There were some issues that I had. But I'll kind of lead up to that, because I think going back to what I was saying before about how, my father got me a camera when I was very young. The thing that really set me off and got me interested in photography as kind of a creative outlet was when Polaroid issued the SX70 camera, that, the folding camera with the brown leatherette, and it spit out those little photographs that they came pre-framed. And that was something that I was, immediately interested in. And my father was very angry at me often because I would use up all of the film when he wasn't paying attention. So he would want to go to make a photograph and there would be no film left. So,
and it was never cheap.
No, it wasn't. No. And of course I was a child. I didn't know. By this time, I think I was probably like 10, 11 years old. And in fact, I found not so long ago a photograph that I had made while I was in Palm Springs. We used to go on vacation there every year for like a week or two. There was the one chance. My mom really loved it there, and my father was always more than happy to kind of make her happy and take the family there. So I had photographed a sunset, and the camera didn't have any real controls, so it's a little bit blurry, or shaky rather, but the colors are very saturated and very beautiful. And for some reason, I think this is when I was maybe 12, I had the presence of mind to title it at the bottom and date it, similar to what we would do now in the fine art photography realm, where you title and you sign and you edition your photographs. So at 12 years old, for some reason, I did that. I've never found another photograph like that where I had done that. But I realized that kind of the aesthetic behind that photograph when I was 12, being instant film and being kind of shaky and surreal and subdued and completely imperfect, that is the aesthetic that I still maintain to this day. So in all of those years, I have not grown in any way. I still kind of create photographs.
I don't think most of us have.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was just an inherent thing in me to make photographs in that way and love it enough to put my stamp of approval on it by titling it and dating it.
Okay, first of all, I want to know what did you title it?
It says Sunset in Palm Springs, and it was when was the date? I think it was probably 1979, I think. Yeah, maybe 78. I can't remember now. I'd have to find it. I have a scan of it somewhere too. But
how old are you?
I'm 54.
Okay, so we're approximately the same age. That's fine.
55 is around the corner, so double nickels.
Yeah, I got 50 coming up on me soon. So yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah, but I always joke with people that I said, no matter how old I get, I still have the mind of a 12-year-old.
Oh, absolutely. My wife constantly asks me if she's married to a 14-year-old, and I'm like, yes, you are. What was the question? Of course you
right,
are.
Exactly. And that's something I don't want to lose. So
no, for me, it's a point of pride, because I feel like all too often we all, in the creative industries, we get into it because we kind of want to keep that childlike wonder and that sort of investigation and learning and all this. And after a while, a lot of us sort of just hunker down into, well, it's my job, and like, oh, I have to do it, or I have a style and I have to keep with that. And they sort of lose that sort of fun and joy and thrill of the process. And I personally am trying my hardest to keep it.
Yeah, that's definitely a struggle I think a lot of people go through, and sometimes it comes and goes. I can honestly say, I mean, there was a point in time where I was shooting commercially so often that I was burned out, and I was waking up in the morning and realizing I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And honestly, it wasn't until I started concentrating more on personal work that became my fine artwork that I kind of regained that love and that interest in the medium. And it has since not gone away. There are definitely times where I don't feel like working on photographs, but the feeling does eventually always come back. There's just give and take with it, like anything else.
Well, and it's a hard balance because, I mean, generally those things, like you were saying, commercial work, like they make a lot of money generally. And versus the fine art choice to go down that path. But oftentimes, like I rarely ever hear of people saying, my commercial work inspires me. Like it doesn't. It generally like crushes your soul is what it does. So it's that hard balance of you want to make more money because either you need it for your family or you feel like it gives you some sense of security or whatever kind of thing it is. But on the other hand, you're not living your sort of happiest life. Like I have this debate going back and forth with my wife because she's an accountant. So she's all about making more money. And I'm all about trying to live a happy life.
Right. Yeah, very much so. I totally get that.
I would rather be like, let's say less affluent, but happy than rich and unhappy.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, without a doubt. I can't even fathom any other mindset. I know it exists, but those are the people I don't.
Yeah, I hope my children can become rich off of my like estate and all that. That's fine. I'm good with that. But I it's just my choice in my life.
Yeah, I mean, if other people can follow in your footsteps and benefit from the work that you've done, then all the better, certainly. I think from my perspective, I'm like incredibly selfish in that regard because it really kind of is about my own happiness because I don't think that I can be there for anybody else or help anybody else be happy if I'm not already in that way myself. Like I have to have kind of a positive outlook going on at any given time for me to kind of share myself, which sounds horrible, but but for me to share myself with other people in any kind of positive way, I have to be like extra positive. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. I can't fake it.
I totally can relate. I completely understand. I mean, it's just generally hard to be there and supportive and everything and loving for other people if you're not feeling it yourself. I get it totally. I mean, it even comes down to like when you're at an art opening or something and somebody else has a really magnificent show. While on the one hand, I'm incredibly, happy for them and proud of them for putting on a great show. There's always that underlying like slight envy that they were able to put off such an amazing show. And it's just like, fuck, what am I missing?
Yeah, I'm the same way. Yeah, you're right. The words "fuck that guy" come through my head immediately, but at the same time, you're thrilled for them. But you think, well, why can't I? Why can't I have that right now? And honestly, it boils down to how much effort are you willing to put into it, because it has to be you caring enough about your own work to put it out there. You're going to be your best fan and nobody's going to do it for you, honestly.
Yes. Now I have a great set of questions based around that for you because you are a practicing artist, much like myself, and you have let's see, 1, 2, 3 part-time jobs at least. I'm sure you have something else you do as well that you're not telling me about, and that's fine. But okay, so for your personal work, how are you getting that out there? Because there's so many competitions, so many open calls, so many all these kinds of things. Like, what are some of the ways that you find, or even portfolio reviews? What ways have you found to be sort of achieving some sort of level of sort of exhibiting and or opportunities?
Honestly, I think the biggest catalyst for getting the work out there is making personal connections with the people who want to see the work. I always tell people like when I'm doing a portfolio review for somebody else, or I'm talking in front of like a college class or something, I always tell people that your audience is out there. It's just up to you to find them. They're not going to simply find you. You have to go looking for them. When I first started looking to have a gallery exhibition or sell work or be in a magazine, the connections that I made at portfolio reviews in general were the strongest that I had ever made. There's a lot of personal attributes that go into selling yourself as a fine art photographer. A lot of people will say they won't buy a photograph from somebody who they don't already like as a person as well, or somebody who conducts themselves in a not necessarily professional manner, but in a way that you find endearing or positive. So portfolio reviews, A, and B is the local community, the local photographic community. I'm in Los Angeles, so we have a very strong photographic community here, and there are a lot of cities in the United States and around the world that do. Some more than others, but there's usually some sort of community-minded group that will kind of take you in under their wing and help share information and hopefully provide some opportunities, or at least point you in the right direction. And that's something that I got here in Los Angeles. There were a few portfolio reviews that I did early on, especially one year. I mean, I think back in like 2011, I had done a portfolio review at Photolusida in Portland, Oregon. And I was showing work and it was very well received. There was definitely one that wasn't, but by and large, I feel like that was when I kind of not made it, but I was kind of accepted to a certain degree, and people kind of took notice. And over time, I nurtured those relationships, and those are the things that led to exhibitions and publications and sort of quote unquote knowing the movers and shakers in the field, because it's both a big community and a small community. And there are all of those people kind of talk to one another. And I found that if you connected well with a certain gallerist, that person isn't always going to keep that information about you to themselves. They're going to have discussions with other gallerists and curators, and, you know, whether there's somebody who works in a museum or just a small local gallery, they'll share that information and immediately kind of get traction that way as well. And it snowballs. It's a slow moving train, but it happens. If you persevere and you stick with it, it comes about. Without a doubt. And I always tell people that. Especially students, people who are just starting out, because it's a daunting process.
Well, it's a decades-long process because some of those relationships take a very long time to build up. And it's hard, though, because there's also the nature of, like, sometimes people live in cities that don't have those, like, local support networks, and they have to do things like travel to these portfolio reviews, which is very costly and time-consuming and all that to do them. I mean, I've done them, and the amount of money I put into them and the amount of time I put into it, I haven't gotten sort of, at least even just compensated kind of like equal amount of money returned. But I'm really horrible. Sure. Well, and it's also mostly my fault because I'm really horrible with keeping connections. I'm great with making connections. I can meet lots of people. Mm-hmm. I'm a great social butterfly, but building those connections and sort of nurturing them over time is definitely one of my biggest weaknesses. And I don't know how to get past it because I'm often thinking it's one of two things. Either I'm too friendly, like buddy, let's go out for a beer, or smoke a bowl, or whatever, or I'm too professional. And so like either way, I seem to turn people off, and I can't find that good balance, which is that sort of just sincere, earnest appreciation for each other's work and what each other does. I'm really bad at that, and I think a lot of artists are.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I think you kind of have to marry those, like the professional in you and the partier in you, right? You have to kind of engage those things together and present them to others when you're talking about your art, or you're sharing your art, or you're seeking out the acceptance from somebody who wants to show your art. I think that your personality as a person plays a really large role in the fine arts. And that goes for everything from how you speak to how you dress to how you present your work in a professional realm. So, kind of going back to talking about community and making those connections during those portfolio reviews, I think that that's also one of the reasons why I started kind of sharing other people's work. I was always fascinated with other people's work as well. So I wanted to be able to, learn from it. Again, the selfish part of me is it's kind of a free education. So I can learn from it and I can share it, and that becomes another connection that gets nurtured over time. And all of those things, they have a way of coming back around. I mean, I have a really good example. When I woke up this morning, I received an email from a journalist in Indianapolis, and I was asked to be on a radio show that talks about analog photography. And the referral came from a photographer who I haven't seen in, I don't even know, 8 or 9 years, maybe 10 years. And somebody who I've really only had a few interactions with, but he knows what I do and I know what he does. And my name popped into his head, and it was now an opportunity. So it's something that it was a connection that I made years ago, but the opportunities present themselves now, years later. And I think that will continue to happen. And being able, like, again, I'm really fortunate to be able to kind of work both sides of the table, so to speak, by being an artist, but also being somebody who is somewhat of a curator and publishing work of others. So making those connections and nurturing them kind of go hand in hand.
It's interesting because, I mean, doing portfolio reviews, I do portfolio reviews, but I do them anonymously through Lens Culture. And it's like I've done like over 3,500 portfolio reviews that way, whereas you're doing them sort of over the table, face to face. And so people get to know you. And it's a very different situation. But like, I think that those portfolio reviews often are great, though I have to admit I did them when I was on the side of the presenting side. Really poorly because I don't even want to get into what I did wrong, but I did lots of things wrong. So like from your side, so being on both sides of the table, like what are some ideas of like how to do it well, or how to do it, or what are some things that we often as creatives do wrong?
I think really the only thing wrong is not to be fully prepared. And I think in order to be prepared, it's not just about having the work, but it's how do you present the work? Do you have an elevator pitch? Can you speak about your own work in a coherent way that is going to interest people? Is there a personal story behind it? And then also doing the research to be prepared is important as well. Nowadays, there are plenty of kind of talks and pseudo workshops about preparing for a portfolio review. There are some people do it for free, and some people you have to pay a fee or $30 to do an hour with a photographer who is really good at it and can help you, put your best foot forward. So, it's like anything else. You have to be a salesperson. So you kind of have to dress the part. Thankfully, as an artist, you can be completely insane with how you dress the part and get away with it. It's not like the business world where you have to wear a suit and tie. Personality comes into play, and professionalism, and just having your ducks in a row, really.
Well, you brought up a point that you said the personal story behind something. And this is something that I've often run into recently. It seems like it's a more prevalent issue or interest, I guess, in the industry, is that, series of works, it doesn't even matter what format, whether it's photography or painting or whatever, but they seem to want to have some more relatable personal connections and less sort of high-minded academic and institutional kind of like philosophical thing behind them. They seem to want to be able to relate to them.
Right. And there are different factions to all of it. And a business field, there's are going to be those who are only going to take you seriously because maybe you have an MFA and because you can kind of speak to the work from a very academic, high-minded way. Honestly, that's not me. And I've definitely tried. I've tried approaching people who are wildly academic and I am not, and try to sell myself to them. And sometimes I'm mildly successful, and sometimes I just crash and burn because I don't have that kind of thinking that they're looking for.
Yeah, I am academic. I mean, I'm a professor. Actually, I recently got promoted to the rank of professor, and I am a professor.
Congratulations.
And I can thank you. I cannot stand that whole academic bullshit. Like, I hate it in academia when I have to write these kinds of things where I have to like use all these pompous words and philosophical blobdy-blahs. They drive me fucking nuts, because the thing is nobody in the world really cares except for the people in academia. Those kinds of things are basically created just for academia, and they have no place outside of it, really. You know, because when it comes to like making a living or having an exhibition or doing all these kinds of things, like, it's really about whether the work is good, not about how it can be academically broken down and sort of, you know, deconstructed in some esoteric way and all this bullshit. And it's really hard because the majority of creative people are not in academia. And so, the idea that academia somehow rules the arts industry, I find very unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's part of the problem, because I mean, if you think about it, did anybody ask Ansel Adams to see his, MFA credentials in order to give him a show? Or no, you just go out and do it the best way you can. And, like I said, about finding your audience, maybe those people aren't your audience, and you have to just move on. Go talk to the people that are smoking cigarettes behind the store and swearing and wearing the Motorhead t-shirt, because those are the people that I gravitate to. And I will say, I'll be a portfolio reviewer who shows up at a portfolio review to look at other people's work wearing that Motorhead t-shirt. And now I just let people know who I am right from the get-go. You saw me on camera earlier when we first started this whole thing. I have long hair, and I'm inevitably, when I'm at a portfolio review and I'm around other reviewers, the length of my hair becomes a topic of discussion. And I always think that it's really funny, because it really has nothing to do with reviewing portfolios, looking at work, finding work, talking about it, or selling myself as a photographer. But it's that personal aspect that people will remember and want to discuss. And if that's how somebody remembers me, well, that's fine. I don't care. But again, that's where I think you really stand out. It isn't the degree that you have, it's who you are as a person. I think that's what the arts are all about, is creativity. It crosses all spectrums. So I don't know. I get it. It actually gets me a little bit worked up, because I can't understand that an MFA crowd only wants to look at people's work who also have an MFA. I just find that very restrictive. And like, why would you want to narrow your audience down so severely? It's just ridiculous to me.
Yeah, we'll come back to the MFA thing in a second, but it's funny because you talked about how people are addressed at these things. And I went to 2 portfolio reviews, one in Portugal and one in Slovakia, as a person being reviewed. So my work was being reviewed, and I was there, and there were awards at both of them. And it was always the person that either just like dressed very normal, nonchalantly, or was outrageously dressed that sort of ended up being the one that connected with the reviewers the most. Like me, I come from a generation, and my parents sort of, raised me to like dress up nice for an interview and all that, and very professional. And I think that realistically, like hearing these kinds of things, I'm like, shit, maybe I didn't show enough of who I am, and I put on a fake facade by like dressing up like it was a job interview. And maybe that actually hurt my opportunities as well. I'll tell you, through this podcast, I have learned so many things that I have done wrong in my career. It's ridiculous.
Right. And that's great. I mean, and honestly, though, I think that there's, a lot of benefit in that. I mean, you obviously, hindsight is 20/20, and talking about things like that with other people are going to make you realize those things that much sooner, but you do kind of think, well, I wish I could go back and do that over again. But at least you have the knowledge now to not have it happen again. Hopefully, from this point forward, you'll let people know who you are from the get-go, because putting on that facade at the beginning I think it becomes disingenuous. People are going to find out who you are, whether you like it or not. If you got that job.
Just to be clear, I was not like in a suit and tie or anything. I mean, I still was wearing like all black and all this kind of stuff, but still.
Right. But I think about a job interview, if you were going into banking or something like that.
No, I was not dressed like that.
But I've seen people show up at portfolio reviews like that, like very just completely put together. And, if that's who you are, that's great. If you can keep it up. But I think most people can't. If it's fake, if it's a facade, you're not going to be able to keep it up 24/7. And if you're going to continue showing up at portfolio reviews and you are going to eventually get that show, people are going to realize who you really are. And people talk, they all kind of compare notes. And I think you just have to be yourself the whole way through. And like I said, I can't fake it. If I'm not really into it, I'm not even going to show up. And honestly, showing up is half the battle.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely fake it. Yeah, I was raised in Washington, D.C., and my father's a priest. So I had to put on a nice facade at the church. And then, of course, going to the political things in D.C. growing up, I had to put on a nice facade and be nice and pleasant, because I was not only at a political whatever, but I was also the representative of my father's congregation kind of bullshit. So yeah, no, facades, that's not a problem. But the problem is that I do that too much, probably.
Yeah, I probably so.
But that's my problem.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about you for a minute.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. No problem. Well, I mean, hell, I had a nice stretch in there of being a drug addict. I've had all kinds of different things, traveled around the world, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I have all kinds of things where I'm not sure if I'm running towards something or running away from something, but that's sort of my career.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I think we're all kind of doing both of those things, And the funny thing is, most of that happens internally. I can't say that I don't lie awake at night sometimes thinking, like, the fuck am I going to do next week when this bill comes up and I have to, come up with the money to pay it, or I have some sort of, important interview with somebody who I don't think is going to like me, or, I worry about things like that all of the time, but it's internal, and I don't often share those things with my significant other, or I feel like I don't want to burden other people with my problems. So I just kind of keep my mouth shut about them all of the time. And maybe that's me faking it then, but I internalize a lot of that sort of thing. And I think that's something that's kind of common in the arts too. I think that, mental health and depression come into play more often than people think.
Yes, and I've spoken at length on this podcast about the fact that to even get up and do this podcast, I do a nice mix of Xanax and caffeine pill to be able to do this. So the Xanax relaxes me, but the caffeine pill focuses me. So without doing it, there are literally episodes where I can be like, oh, that's one where I didn't have any Xanax, or that's an episode where I didn't have a caffeine pill. You can tell.
Right. Well, you sound pretty put together to me, and you got a great radio voice. So
thank you. I got that from my father, the priest.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, mental health, I mean, we all suffer from some form of it, I believe. I mean, period. I'm not saying just creative people. I mean, everybody suffers from some form of something or other. And in the creative fields, it's sadly not talked about enough. We internalize things. I'm completely an anxious person. I'm always nervous and anxious about everything. I mean, every time I get on here to do a podcast, I'm always like, oh my God, what the fuck am I going to ask this person? Because a lot of people don't understand. When I started this podcast 3 years ago, I used to have literally a check sheet of questions, like a journalist, basically. I'm going to ask these 10 questions. And later on, I was just suddenly you know what? It's not interesting. It's more like just an interview. And I wanted it to be more of a conversation and be very organic and natural. Literally, when I start the podcast, I have a blank piece of paper in front of me with just your name at the top of the paper, and that's it. And then I just hope that the guest is interesting enough to like lead me down a path of some interesting topics, and because otherwise I got nothing.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. And it's funny because I do my share of interviewing people as well. And I often, there's a certain amount of research that you need to do ahead of time just to, you kind of want to know your subject at least a little bit to so that you can connect with them. And maybe, at least for me, I have kind of a small checklist of not necessarily questions all the time, but topics that I think apply to that person. So you kind of let those topics out and then you just kind of have the conversation and see how it goes. And it's never going to go the way you think it's going to either. I've done these before, and I'll have a 2-hour conversation with somebody, and then I'll finish it and I'll leave and I'll go out and I'll talk to my girlfriend, and she said, "What did you talk about?" And I'm like, I have no idea. I have no idea what I just said to this person. And then I'm afraid to go back and listen to it when it finally comes out, because I think, oh God, did I put my foot in my mouth, or what did I say wrong? Did I lie? What did I do wrong? But that's the insecure person in me.
Absolutely. But I mean, that issue of it's like a fine line of like, did I lie, or did I like embellish a story, or did I even tell somebody else's story as my own story? Like, that's the one that I always wonder. Like, right. Did I just tell an anecdote that's actually somebody else's anecdote as though it was mine?
Yeah, I had a friend that used to do that all of the time. He would, when we would go out would be amongst friends, he would tell a story that he heard from somebody else, and he would tell it like he was there at the time. And I would look at him sometimes and I'd be like, dude, why are you telling this story? You weren't even there. And sometimes he would look at me like, oh, that's right. Like, he would just kind of imagine himself as part of the story. And then when he would retell somebody else's story, he would magically be a part of the whole scenario.
Well, some people are such good storytellers that I feel like I'm part of the story.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, maybe that's how he saw it. But I always thought it was the strangest thing that he would do that. Like anything, you don't remember how you might have told that story, or like you said, how you might have embellished it. So over the years, the story changes every single time. So, and usually they become grander than they ever were.
Yeah. Like, you've told the story so many times that you think it's your story.
Yeah, you've convinced, and it's funny. I don't know that I've ever really done that, but I know that I've kind of in my head thought about it. Like, oh yeah, there was that time that this happened, and oh wait, I wasn't really there. I heard it from this guy. So.
Indeed. All right, let's get back to the MFA thing. Now, I'm assuming by your position on MFAs that you do not have one. Is that correct?
No, I do not.
Don't get me wrong. My position on MFAs is basically there are only 2 reasons to get an MFA these days, which is one, if you want to teach. That's very clear cut one there. Or 2, if you sort of want to be part of a peer connection group. Specifically, what I'm thinking of is like the Yale painting group, kind of thing. Like, if you want to make a peer group, those are the only 2 reasons to get an MFA. Short of that, I don't see the reason for, especially with the price of it in the United States these days.
Right. And I think that's, honestly, lately, that's become a bigger issue than ever before, just the cost behind it. And, are you going to get enough out of it to kind of cover that cost? Is it going to be worth it to you? And I think year after year, that percentage, gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
I'm still paying off my student loan.
Right. So, and that's something that we had touched on before, like when I was going to Brooks Institute, I didn't finish because I didn't have enough money to finish. And I had my issues with the school and how they were teaching, not just me, but everybody. And it got to a point, it was a trade school. They don't exist anymore. but they had to make money off of their students. I mean, that's how they needed to survive. And in the end, they did that so poorly that they went out of business. So how that really came to fruition, I'm not sure, because I was left long, long ago. It got to a point where I thought, well, okay, I don't have the money to pay for this out of pocket anymore. Do I want to get student loans, and do I want to go in debt to a school for an education that I don't think I'm getting it? It's not coming through well enough for me or a lot of people that I would see. And do I want to be paying for this years from now and just completely disgruntled about the fact that I stayed longer than I thought I should have? And the answer was just no. I mean, now it was just time to leave. And I just decided to go out and kind of do it on my own. I took the information that I had at that point, and I knew that I had to make a living. I couldn't stay in school, and I couldn't do both. I couldn't afford to make a living and stay in school enough to make it work, at least not for me. Some people can do that. I couldn't. I adopted the learn by doing method, and so I started assisting photographers in San Francisco. I left Santa Barbara and I moved to San Francisco with my girlfriend at the time. She was kind of in the same boat, and we just started working. And thankfully, through fate and good luck, I met up with some good people who were still friends of mine to this day. Those connections have paid off over time. So it was definitely the right decision for me to make back then. So to think about doing that now, there's even less chance that I would ever do that. Although I will say that I did look into recently the idea of going back to school online and maybe achieving some sort of a degree, only because I thought, well, maybe at some point I do want to teach. But I realize I'm not going to stick with it long enough to be able to teach at any kind of I'm not going to get I'm not going to get an MFA. It's just not going to happen. I'm not the kind of person to get one, to make that happen for myself.
Oh, and it's not for everybody, because one of the things that I have a pet peeve about with the MFA programs is MFA programs often end up being people who become art teachers. So it doesn't even matter which discipline. But one of the things that the MFA programs does not teach is how to teach.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that I always thought was kind of unusual too, because over the years, I've known some people who they've entered into an MFA program and they've graduated. Some of them will kind of just turn around and they'll start teaching immediately. And it just seems very odd to me that you wouldn't take all of that information that you got and put it into play. You didn't do anything kind of practical with it. This is going to sound really horrible. You turned around and now you're regurgitating that information into the minds of other people, when the experience of being a photographer or working in photography didn't go beyond the schooling that you went through or the limited personal work that you made, because you haven't interacted with others. You haven't been a team member or a team player or a problem solver. I mean, ultimately, especially in like the commercial industry, you have to be a problem solver. And how do you then turn around and mold the minds of the future of photography when you haven't experienced any of those things yourself? I know some really smart people who have very little education, and I know some really dumb people who have miles of education. But like anything else, there's exceptions to every rule. I do know some people who have an MFA, and they're absolutely wonderful people. So it's not fair of me to kind of just blanket put it down. It's like, oh yeah, no, MFAs are stupid. Like I can't say that. I can say that they're not for me, and I can say that I don't think that they are for a lot of people, and like more so now than ever before. But my problem has always just been the standoffishness that I would get occasionally from people from the academic side of things. It's like a little clique, right? It's like, oh, you're not smart enough, or you're not good enough to be in our club. And I just think that's just ridiculous.
It happens even within the academic worlds, because like art historians are very snobby against art practitioners, and then technology based practitioners are very snobby against traditional based type people. So like the clickiness is everywhere. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It's not just an in or out group as far as in academia or out of academia. Even within academia, they're quite snobby and bitchy.
Right. Yeah, and I just can't wrap my head around that. Like I said, I always go back to like when I was talking about doing, showing my work in portfolio reviews and then turning around and doing portfolio reviews for other people. Like it's about community. I think you want to embrace as many people and as many ideas as possible. So to exclude a group of people for one reason or another is I just don't get it.
Well, but see, I could point that back at you because you choose to do things only with people who use analog processes. So you're excluding all the digital people.
No, actually, I'm not. I mean, yeah, and honestly, I actually get that a lot. Like when I do the portfolio reviews, somebody will inevitably show me their work, and they'll say, "Oh, well, I didn't shoot any of this on film, but I just thought I'd talk to you anyway." And I'm like, "Dude, I'm not only about film or analog processes. That's just one segment of what I do. Because it's such a big part of what I do, people just make that assumption. Yes, I make the bulk of my work on film. I own all kinds of digital cameras, and I know how to use all of them, and I know how to use the computer programs that support them, and, use the biggest biggest file out of the most expensive digital back, and how do you make that work, and how do you apply it? To me, they're all just tools, and you just have to pick the tool for the job. That's all. You don't. If it requires a screwdriver, you don't use a hammer. You just use the right tool for what you need to do. So I have to embrace all of those things because I do so many different things. Like I don't have a choice. Like I gotta learn how to use all of that stuff. And some things I fall behind on, and other things I don't. So again, those are all opportunities that you can take. So I try to take as many as I possibly can, or as many as I have time for.
Well, I mean, within that though, like, so when it comes to your personal work, so you generally shoot with analog. Do you do your own like silver gelatin or alternative process printing, or when you're doing Polaroid, do you like sell or exhibit the originals, or do you scan them and show or sell prints? Like, what's your sort of workflow and exhibition and sales sort of process for working with analog film and or digital processes?
Well, personally, it depends on the work. So I can say to a certain degree, it's all of those things. And it's changed over the years. I definitely embrace the digital side of things, even though, I mean, obviously, when I started, there was no such thing as digital photography. I kind of have the mindset of it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, that kind of workflow is always going to probably be a part of me, but I definitely had to embrace the digital side of things. And at this point now, things being a hybrid situation are more common than ever before. And that's kind of where I am now. That's why I say I don't try to profess just an analog way or just a digital way. It has to be a hybrid situation. And I think that just presents opportunities because, again, those are more tools at your disposal. So I predominantly still am using original Polaroid materials from the original Polaroid Corporation, not what Polaroid is now, because it's a completely different thing. And all of those materials are expired. They often don't work. They produce a print or a negative that almost always has some sort of inherent flaw to it. But that's who I am, and that's how the kind of the work that I present as an artist, that works for me. I love that part of it, and I embrace it 100%. That said, I can then take a positive print or a Polaroid negative, because my favorite types of Polaroid were the ones that also produced a negative as well. And again, these films are no longer manufactured and haven't been for 15 years now, I think. 14, 15 years. So, but some of that film still works. And it's unfortunate that that's all gone away. There have been attempts at trying to recreate it, but it's not the same thing. It can't be. It's impossible. So sometimes I'll just scan a print or a negative, and I will make editioned work out of that. And oftentimes I will show original prints. In fact, there are 3 Polaroid prints in Nanjing, China right now that are supposed to be part of an exhibition. Because of COVID, that everything keeps shutting down over there as well as here. And the exhibition keeps getting put off. And I'm actually talking with another artist now who the conversation occurred over Instagram originally, and then it moved to email. And now we're sharing work with each other, and I'm looking at a way to kind of possibly do a 2-person show because she has a similar aesthetic. Her subject matter is different, but her aesthetic is basically the same as mine. So how can we kind of marry these 2 works together and present an exhibition somewhere that speaks to how we both see the world? And then there's some things that I do that, I've done a couple of small documentary projects that aren't on my website currently. Those were done all digital. And I definitely don't spend as much time in the traditional darkroom or doing, historical processes as much as I would like. And again, it's not because I don't want to. It's these days it becomes harder and harder to find the time. I've kind of spread myself a little bit thin, and I'm trying to fix that or improve that to a certain degree. I kind of want to do it all. I can't, but I try.
Well, I have this memory back from I don't know, probably 2010, maybe a little before that, having conversations with people where they asked, what do you think is the future of the darkroom print, the silver gelatin print? And I used to say that I believed it was going to turn into sort of its own fine art form, basically. So the value of a true silver gelatin print will become more sort of elevated in status and sort of revered and appreciated more than digital, because digital will become the most common thing, and therefore their value will be sort of lesser than a silver gelatin print. Was I right? Have you noticed that people are either more appreciative or more willing to even pay more for your traditional silver gelatin work than your digital prints?
The answer is yes and no. So it depends on who you talk to. Because like everything, everybody's got an opinion and everybody's got a preference. And it's all very subjective. I think years ago, there were more people who were only collecting work that was traditional like that. Gelatin silver prints or platinum palladium prints, cyanotype, whatever kind of historical process.
It's so sad that silver gelatin is now referred to as a historical process. But anyways, go on.
Right. And people, because I still shoot Polaroid, some people have called that alternative or historical. And I have a hard time thinking of it that way.
Me too.
But I mean, I guess in a certain way it is. But now these days, the archival pigment print has become more accepted than ever before, as it should, I think. But there will always be people that only collect gelatin silver prints, usually just for personal reasons. And there are going to be people who tell you that those are superior to digital prints. And I think in some ways they are, and in some ways maybe not. I think the jury's still out on a lot of this stuff. The way of making digital prints, honestly, I think is still in its infancy. There's still a lot of improvement that can be made. But at the same time, great steps have been made over the last several years to make it a viable art form of itself. It's funny that you kind of bring it up because 2 days from now, I'm going to be in a panel discussion. It's an online panel discussion for a group in Helsinki, Finland, called the Helsinki Darkroom Festival. And it's an association of people that in Finland that have a great interest in working in the darkroom and making traditional prints. As part of this panel discussion and as a representative of Analog Forever magazine, we're going to talk about things like that, like what is the status of printing in the darkroom these days? Is it waning, or is it increasing? And honestly, I do think it's increasing. I think more than ever before, people are becoming interested in historical processes, alternative processes, and traditional darkroom printing. But at the same time, I think predominantly the reason for that comes from the digital world. And I have two examples. I have one of them is a story of a conversation I had with Melody Bostic in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Of Bostic and Sullivan.
She runs Bostic and Sullivan, right? They provide chemistry and kits and workshops and teaching to learn how to do cyanotype or platinum palladium or the albumin or any number of traditional process. And when the advent of digital came along and that kind of took over the photographic world, everybody, it was the new thing. Everybody wanted to know it. And smartphones came about and everybody wanted a smartphone and wanted to just take pictures with their phone. So all of that attention that they had received before started to decline, and they were selling less and less month to month, to the point where they could literally see, okay, this is the month in the year that we go out of business, because it's no longer sustainable. But then through digital means, the way to make a really great digital negative came about. I think it was Pictorio film. It got to a point, it existed for a short time, but it wasn't very good. And then suddenly there was a product that came out that they started selling, and it enabled people to take a photograph from wherever, get it in your computer, insert this film into your printer, and make a digital negative that you can now do any of those processes with, especially things like platinum palladium and cyanotype. And now you didn't have to have an original piece of film. You didn't have to pull out your 11 by 14 Deerdorf and make a portrait with it. You could take a phone photo, put that in your computer, output it onto this film at 11 by 14, and make a platinum palladium print. And when that happened, their sales went through the roof. And now they're doing better than ever before. And so it literally took the digital world for their business to blossom to the point where it is now. And now, because of that interest, they're doing more workshops than ever before. Other people are doing more workshops than ever before. So the popularity is growing in significant ways. And the other thing that kind of has helped usher this in is Instagram. And because when Instagram became wildly popular, all of these other photo apps started to come out. Some of them did specialty things, like they would make your photograph look like it was done with wet plate collodion. They would make it look like a tintype of some sort. And those like millions of people are now downloading those apps and taking pictures of their friends and making them look this way, and not knowing that initially that, well, that's based on a real tangible thing, an actual ambrotype or tintype that somebody made in camera with chemistry. There wasn't even film. The film was the chemistry. So people start to kind of discover these things. They would show those pictures to their friends. Inevitably, somebody would say, that was a real thing, right? That isn't just an app. That didn't come out of somebody's head. That came out of a real process. And enough people were like, what? I can actually make this sort of thing. And it got to the point where those people now were, seeking out workshops and ways of making photographs like that. And I've seen it happen where somebody has held a tintype for the very first time, and it's like this epiphany. It's this magical wave that washes over them, and they're just like, their eyes light up, and they're just dumbfounded by this object that they're holding in their hands, and they're immediately sucked in. And now a lot of those people have turned it around, and kind of ditched, smartphone photography, and now they're on eBay buying large format cameras and lenses and learning the process and building their own darkrooms in their homes and their garages, and they're putting that information to use and making real tangible art. And again, the start of that often comes from smartphone apps. The world has had an enormous benefit to the digital world. It started to kill it off, but then is now bringing it back. And now, like I said, there's hybrid processes all of the time. People are combining these things. There's often a digital aspect to much analog work. Very little of it is kind of purist by degree.
Well, and as far as like being practitioners, I think that's magnificent, and I love it, and I hope to get back to it even at some point myself. But what I'm wondering about too is the other side of it. So the people collecting, the people buying works, like, are they wanting the silver gelatin and historical prints, or are they sort of still on the digital print side of buying?
I think no, a lot of that work is being sold.
Sorry, which work?
I'm sorry, the analog work is being embraced more now, but I think it's in part because when you make, for instance, a tintype, you only get one, right? That's an original piece of art. It might as well be a painting that somebody painted with watercolors or something. So it's an edition of one. And over the years, we've seen editions become smaller and smaller and smaller. So the smaller the edition, or if it's an original piece like a tintype or an original Polaroid print, but those are highly sought after. I mean, they usually command much higher prices. So then that becomes the hurdle, right? Can I afford to buy that one of a kind object? But the most serious collectors are definitely looking for that kind of work. But by the same token, somebody can make a digital print and say, I'm going to make 30 by 40 prints, and there's only going to be 2. Well, now those, scarcity breeds value. So those 2 prints are going to be very high priced. But when you get into the original works like alternative or historical processes where there's just one, oftentimes people will scan that and they'll make a digital equivalent and kind of offer that. But a lot of those artists don't really have much interest in doing that. Once they've made that original piece, they've moved on. They don't have much interest in making a reproduction of it. That always comes from the gallerist. They're the ones, if I can only make money off of one, well, that's no good. I'd like to make money off of 10. So, and the artist is going to benefit as well. But you have, if you can make, if you're transparent about how it is that this print came about, that it's a digital reproduction of an original piece, and somebody loves it enough to spend that kind of money on it, well, then that's great. But the original is definitely always going to be the most valuable part.
Well, the idea of editions, I mean, I just recently had a conversation with Peter Hay Halpert about the issue of like the history of how editioning even got created in the first place in photography. And it's a fascinating background of the whole scenario. But the whole idea of editions, it's changed a lot. Like, I mean, I remember the days when editions were 50, 100, 250, and now I'm seeing editions of 3, 5, 7. I mean, what's changed in the industry other than sort of this encouragement towards exclusivity and scarcity that has made it so that artists or specifically photographers are making much, much shorter editions?
If you think about it, you're right. Yeah. I mean, I know some people that when they started out, that's what they were doing. Their editions were anywhere from 100 to 250. But if you think about it, are you ever going to sell 100 prints of anything that you do? And if you do, it's going to take so many years for that to happen. You're going to continuously make new art. So, hopefully. So you kind of move on a little bit from the idea of making a whole lot of prints of any one thing. And also these days you could have an edition of 10, but you don't have to make all 10 right away. It used to be when you would do If you had an edition of 50 and you were doing gelatin silver printing and it was 1985, you would probably make all 50 of those prints and they'd be sitting in a drawer.
I still have a number of those.
Yeah, I do too. But nowadays, if I print something digitally, it's more of a print on demand sort of thing. And personally, for me, I kind of treat it as going into the darkroom again. So I will often kind of tweak or change things a little bit differently. I've changed papers over the years, whereas a print might have been offered on type A paper. Well, now it's offered on type B because now I found something that I like a little bit better. It's essentially the same image, but there are differences. If you hold them side by side, there are going to be subtle differences. Just like if you were making traditional darkroom prints, if you're doing burning and dodging, there's probably going to be some subtle differences that are occurring in there. So I like kind of making the prints evolve over time and change. So, yes, they're in an edition and technically you want something to be consistent, but at the same time, I like the idea of it always being a little bit different and unique in its own way.
Okay, wait, you brought something up earlier. You talked about pigment prints. I think I'm maybe a little bit out of date on all this. Like, is a pigment print the same as an inkjet print, or is there something actually different, or did they just come up with a new word?
Well, both, I guess. You can say they're all inkjet prints because the types of printers that spit them out are known as inkjet printers. We don't call them pigment printers, but ink that you use has changed. It's now pigment form. It's like, the chemical makeup of those inks now is far more archival than it was even 5 years ago. And especially 10, 15 years ago, I made some digital prints many, many years ago that the inks that made them up are not inherently stable. So they've either faded or changed color or kind of morphed in one way or another so that the print is not exactly the same or not even close to being the same as what it was when I first made it. But the prints that I make now, they're far more stable and they're going to look the same 6 months from now as they will 60 years from now. So, and that's what you want. I mean, you want to try to maintain as high of a museum standard as possible. So making them archival, well, that's what the pigment prints are. They're just basically more archival. It is a different word, but they are truly different.
Okay, but I'm so not into the whole archival thing. I was raised in that, or I keep saying I was raised. I was taught that in school, like that everything should be as archival as possible until I found out about like the Starnes twins and all that stuff. And I'm just like, now I'm just like, archivalness is great if you can afford it and if you can garner the price of when you try and sell a truly archival print. I'm thinking silver gelatin at this point. I mean, they're expensive to produce and therefore you're going to have to charge a lot. It's sort of like, I'm more of the Degas kind of like, I'll paint on some cardboard if that's all I have to work on. So it's the question of how important really is those archival processes. I mean, my teachers were all about archival everything, even down to the sleeves we hold our negatives in. But to a certain extent, does it really matter? Shouldn't it be more about what your creative idea is, what your creative expression is, rather than did you put the money and the time and the effort into making all your processes archival?
I think, well, again, my answer is always kind of both. So,
but I'll give you my reason for saying this. Not once in any sale I have ever done of my artwork in my entire career has any buyer ever asked me if I was using archival processes. Ever. Oh,
okay. I have been asked that.
Okay. Well, see, this is where we differ. I've never had that experience.
Right. But sometimes it doesn't come down to the collector when that decision is made, because there are processes that some photographers are doing that there is no way to preserve it. I mean, there are people who make things like anthotypes. Once that's made, if it's exposed to any amount of light, it's going to gradually fade. And none of them are going to be around 100 years from now. I don't even know that it's physically impossible, because there's no way to fix the image onto the paper. It's just inherent in the process. So you keep them in a box, or you keep them in a drawer. I've seen people exhibit them on a gallery, but they're behind like a black velvet curtain, which is kind of cool because now it's an experience. You're not just looking at a print. You become part of the experience. So you actually have to walk up and draw back the little velvet curtains and look at, and then, oh, I can examine the print. And then when you're done, you close the curtains back up because that little bit of light that you just let in at a chemical level faded that print just a little bit, probably not to the point where you're ever going to notice. But if that happens 1,000 times, yeah, you probably will notice. So the more you exhibit them, the more you show them, the less time that they're going to be around. So the archival standards for something like that, that just goes out the door. So again, it kind of depends on the person making the work and the type of work that they're making. If their work speaks to the passage of time, then, what better way to illustrate that than to create an artwork that's not going to last up to the passage of time.
Yeah, I've definitely grown into that sort of ethos more than the purist traditional archival stuff. But I also think that like my teachers sort of maybe beat it into me too hard. So now I'm rebelling against it.
I think my interest in doing things archivally, if I was a purist when it came to making things archival, then I probably would never make any kind of digital print, pigment print or not. I mean, I deal with work of an imperfect nature. So and again, like I said, like when I make my prints, I kind of make them a little bit different. If a print changes a little bit over time, I'm okay with that because I'm not going to be around long enough to see it really change, and leaving behind a legacy of work that's going to be enjoyed for generations. It's probably still going to happen, but I mean, I have kind of a dim view of what's going to happen to the planet in general in the future. So I don't know that anybody's going to be looking at my prints 1,000 years from now, because I don't know that this planet's going to exist 1,000 years from now. But that's just my, horrible fatalist way of looking at life.
Yeah, that's a whole different podcast.
I hope I'm
Let's
wrong.
not go down that path.
Right. Exactly. But that's kind of, that speaks to my state of mind and how I make work. So, and like I said, everybody's an individual when it comes to making work. So when it comes to archival standards, I guess there are rules, but like with everything else, rules were made to be broken. So if you don't subscribe to that, that's completely fine. Have a reason for it, but you can't just say, oh, I don't care about archival standards. If it's how you learned or it's how you were raised and you just don't have an interest in it, well, that's fine. But maybe somebody won't buy your print because of it. But, I don't know. I don't know how often that really does happen.
Another mistake I've made in my career. Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, if you think about it, even sketch artists, like what about the paper that a sketch artist uses or the type of pencil or pen that they use? Like, are they using a Sharpie or are they using something with some sort of, again, archival ink that's going to last for generations? If you really love the art and you have a personal connection to it and you have the money to pay for it, you don't care. You don't care if it's going to be around 100 years from now. You're going to buy it and put it on your wall anyway.
I should hope so. But unfortunately, that's not always true with all collectors.
True.
Yeah, just to be clear, I want to be clear, though, about my archival position. I'm not against archival processes. I just feel like there's a bit of an obsession with it, and I believe it's a bit of a sort of overblown obsession with it, specifically in the photographic medium. Right.
Well, and I think, again, it depends on who you're talking to. If you want to sell things that are going to be in a museum collection, then that might come up. I think a lot of museums are only going to want things that are going to stand the test of time because, they're going to want to display them whenever they
Unless you're Doug and Mike Starnes.
Right. True.
Always the outliers.
Different. Yeah, there's exceptions to every rule. So, I just think embracing all aspects, making that your aesthetic, for me, that's kind of what I'm about. I try to, I guess, adopt a friendlier, more positive, more engaged and welcoming attitude to all of it as much as I can. I don't want to exclude anybody for any reason that really isn't, like why would you want to exclude anybody from anything that you do? I would rather embrace than exclude. And I guess that's just part of who I am, as both as a person and as an artist. So
if I were to go out and buy a photographic print, a fiber-based print would be my number one, fiber-based silver gelatin. My number two would be a digital print on a nice, Hammermühle or a beautiful Epson paper. And then my last would be some sort of plastic RC print.
Mm-hmm. Right. If you had the same image on all three of those, you would see a difference in quality. And I think you would put them in the same order by their quality as well. They think that RC print's not going to look as good as the fiber-based print or as good as the inkjet print. And the inkjet print's probably not going to look as good as the silver gelatin. But then again, the silver gelatin's not going to look as good as the platinum palladium print, because maybe now you get even deeper tones.
Yeah, I should have put platinum palladium at the top. That's my number one.
Right.
Then number two being fiber-based print. But platinum and palladium I'll put in there with Van Dyke Brown, cyanotype, etc. Platinum, palladium, and then fiber-based silver gelatin.
Okay.
Boy, we're getting really pedantic.
We have a rating system now.
I do. I absolutely do. But I mean, but within those, but I could even get it like even more pedantic and minuscule on the whole thing, because if that alternative process, so your cyanotype, Van Dyke Brown, or platinum palladium was done on a particular paper, so like done on a Reeves BFK or some sort of Fabriano paper, I'd be willing more to buy that than if it was done on a tissue paper or something that I know is basically not an archival paper. I know I'm being hypocritical at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's up to the artist, I think, to choose the material. If the images you want to make, you put onto toilet paper, or what you want to make, and there's a reason for it, if there's intention behind it, then go ahead, put your images on toilet paper. And I bet you'll be able to find somebody that'll still want to buy it.
Well, see, you just touched on, I think, what the most important part of, I think, all of this conversation is that, like, no matter what decisions you make, whether to use, expired Polaroid film, plastic cameras, digital cameras, archival processes in your printing process, as long as it has a reason and has some sort of connection to the purpose of the work, I feel like that's the most important aspect of it.
Yes. Yeah, and there are plenty of people that get into wet plate collodion because they fall in love with the process and how it looks. But sometimes they'll make a body of work that, like, well, was that the best way to make the images? I don't know. I mean, becomes a topic of discussion. Sometimes I think that there's good reason for it, and sometimes there's not. So, and it's funny because the longer I do this, the more I realize over time how my own aesthetic and reasons for doing things have come about. And so now I can kind of look back and speak to that a little bit better than I did even a few years ago, because you get to a point where I realize that I choose an imperfect way of making photographs because I view myself as an imperfect person. And honestly, all people are imperfect to a certain degree. But how I apply an image to my intent, it's kind of perfect, but most people aren't going to know it unless I say it out loud. I bring that up because I think only recently have I really realized something about my own photographs and why I choose to make them look the way that they do. I mean, if you were to look at the different bodies of work I've made over time, you'll see that most of them were made with instant film, mostly black and white, positive, negative film. And a lot of them have been made with toy cameras on traditional film like Ilford or Kodak films. And I've come to realize that the images done with Polaroid they're my reality. They're how I kind of see the world in a waking state. And my toy camera images are how I see the world from a dream state. To a certain degree, I think I've always known that, but it hasn't been something that I've really kind of talked about until recently, or really kind of examined. We were talking about mental health earlier, and certainly aging comes into the topic as well, because the older I get, the more I have the benefit of the years to be able to look at my past and draw some probably more refined conclusions than I did when I was younger. The aging process and my own lack of archivability becomes an issue. So if that makes any sense at all, I don't even know.
It does. I mean, the issue of like also just like getting older and stuff. Like I was talking with a photographer, Jock Sturges, way back in the beginning of the podcast. Like, I mean, that is in like early episodes. And he was talking about how he believed that his best work is behind him at this point, because he's getting older for sure. And it's sort of, I often wonder, like, what will each of us be known for in time? So like maybe we're not known for anything right now, but like at the end of our lives kind of thing, like when people look back over our careers, I often wonder like what will be the things that will define our entire careers. And it seems to believe it's his younger work, and I wonder whether or not we're necessarily making our better work when we're older, because in the old days it was, age comes wisdom and knowledge and the ability to sort of be more introspective and more thoughtful and all that. But it seems like youth is being more elevated and more admired these days. And so I wonder whether it's the works we made in our youth or the works we're going to make later in our lives that are going to be the sort of stronger, more prominent works looking back over our careers.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you think about it, when you were younger, you didn't have as much fear as you do now. And honestly, I think the younger generation these days, as opposed to when we were younger, they probably have more fear than we did back then, because the world has become a smaller place, and I think a little bit more of a dangerous place. But then there I go, going back into my kind of fatalist view of the future. So now, as you get older, you can kind of look back on your years and you realize all of the things that you did because you didn't have fear. You acted oftentimes in a much more impetuous way. And you think, how the hell did I even get through those years? How am I even still breathing now? Because, I think about all of the stupid shit that I did when I was younger, not even as an artist, just as a person. And I think, fuck, I'm lucky. I'm lucky I'm still around. So.
Oh yeah, I should have died at least 3 times in my life.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So honestly, that's how I kind of see everything that I do now. Like, I think, you know what? I made it this far. It's all gravy now. As long as I can remain enthusiastic about it, I've won the battle, or maybe even the war. I don't know. And maybe that's how I would choose to be remembered. Not even necessarily for the work that I've made, but for the person that I've become. Or try to become, at least. And that's somebody who is engaged and enthusiastic about what it is that they're doing. I attribute that thinking to my father, because he was the one that had always said to me, like, when you get older and when you choose a profession, do what you love as your life's work, and that will take you as far as you can go. Like, that's the definition of success. Are you happy doing what it is that you're doing day in and day out? And I can honestly say at this point in my life, I definitely am. And even if nobody ever bought another one of my prints, at this point in my life, I could give a shit, because I already feel like I've won. I already feel like it's all gravy from here on out. And if I can spread that kind of love around a little bit, then all of the better, because if I can help other people kind of get to that point as well, then I see that all as another success.
It's difficult because we all want sort of quote unquote success, whatever our individual definition of that is. But there is also that point of like, you really should enjoy whatever it is you do. Like, I have a long story that I've told before on the podcast, so I'm not going to tell it again. But in the end, it ended up basically me looking at a bunch of people and just being like, in Washington, D.C., a bunch of bureaucrats going to their government jobs and just being like, I never want that job. I never want to work a job where I like drag myself kicking and screaming to a job, dressed in a suit, carrying a briefcase, and like having to do it kind of thing. Like, I have tried my best in my life to make my life into something where, like, even if some of the things that we do, whether it's having to find clients or trying to find submit to things that are difficult and tedious and all these kinds of things that we all have to do, grant submissions, residency submissions, whatever, I still enjoy it more than almost any other profession I could fall into.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I feel the same way. Am I as enthusiastic as I always have been about it? Or am I going to get to a point where maybe I don't want to do this? Because, yeah, even as enthusiastic as I am, there are days that are hard. But will I get to a point where I don't want to do it at all anymore? And I think, well, okay, maybe I will. Well, what should I do? And I can't think of a single thing that I would do where I could be as enthusiastic or I could bring myself to do. Because, like I said, if my heart isn't in it, I can't fake it. I just can't do it. I know people who are fully engaged in the art world, but they're also in finance. But I can't, the thought of getting up in the morning and putting on a suit and tie and going to a bank or something and sitting behind a desk and talking to people about loans and things like that. How do you do that? I don't know that I could have learned to do that. I'd sooner be homeless than I would do that. So hopefully that won't ever happen.
Yeah, my wife constantly asks me, like, well, what are you going to do when you retire? And I'm like, what's this retire thing you speak of? I expect to die either in the studio or in the classroom or whatever. Like, to me, I did not picture any sort of stopping point other than death.
Yeah, exactly. I thought about that too. Like, well, the only thing that would cause me to kind of retire is if I couldn't physically do something.
If I couldn't physically do something, I would find a different way to do it. Like, we're all problem solvers.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. I don't know that, when I turn 65, can I collect Social Security now if it's still around? Can I collect Social Security and live off of that? Well, then I think, well, what am I going to do? Sit around and watch TV? I don't want to do that. That sounds horrible.
Indeed.
I want to be engaged in what I'm doing.
Any last things you want to sort of share, some advice, some encouragement, whatever, to other practitioners out there?
The only thing that I would say is the thing that I always tell students when I've spoken at some colleges many times, and I put it into, like PowerPoint presentations, and I've said it out loud over and over again, that perseverance is key. You're not going to consider yourself successful. You're not going to get your work in front of a specific curator. You're not going to learn the process that you're interested in unless you continue to work at it. If you give up at any point in time, you're done. Like, you're just dead in the water. You have to keep moving forward. And that's kind of something that I have always adopted on a day-to-day basis in my own life, that I always have to take one forward step every single day. If I end my day in a worse state than I began it, then I've kind of lost. So it can be something that's very simple. It could be, did I send the email to the magazine publisher that had some JPEGs in it, showing them my work? Did I make that cold call? Did I make a print today? Did I work on an image in Photoshop today? I have to keep moving forward because, like a shark, if a shark stops swimming, it dies. So I need to keep swimming, because if I stop, I'm going to die too. I just can't. I have to keep going because there is no other option. So I always tell students that perseverance is key.
Marvelous. Well, thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, and today was a big step forward. I mean, this is great. There's almost nothing other than making art. Having discussions with like-minded people is among my most favorite things to do. So I appreciate you reaching out, and I appreciate the time to have this conversation with you.
Well, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Good. I would hate for it to not be.
Thank you for listening to the entire episode. We would appreciate it if you would share this podcast with your friends, family, coworkers, studio mates, or anybody with an interest in the arts and creative endeavors. The building and strengthening of the arts and creative community is at the core of our mission for this podcast. They can listen and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. We are produced by 5014. The audio was edited by CushAudio Services, and the music was created by Pete Bybee. The Wise Fool Art Podcast is supported in part by an EEA grant from Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway in an effort to work together for a green, competitive, and inclusive Europe. We would also like to thank our partners Hunt Kastner in Prague, Czech Republic, and Kunstsentrene i Norge in Norway. Links to EEA grants and our partner organizations are available in the show notes or on our website at wisefoolpod.com.